Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the December edition of the Business Swansea Power Hour. Today's subject is recruiting in a challenging recruitment market. So it says what it does what it says on the tin. So the format will be is that I'll hand across to Richard now. He'll run through a presentation, about 30 minutes or so, and that should leave a good bit of time for sort of a fairly informal Q&A at the end of it and pick up any points that Richard's covered. So I head across to Richard now. You can introduce yourselves, Richard, and then run through the details that you've got of your presentation. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. I'm Richard. My background is I went straight into recruitment from university back in 2007, I think it was, so about 15 years ago now. And I spent 14 years in a recruitment agency working in Wales and in Australia in various sectors, from construction to mining to hospitality, finance, all sorts of different things. For the last 2 years, I've been working at Pobl Group as the head of talent attraction, managing a team of, currently we've got a team of 12 that do all of our recruitment administration. We quite a large organisation, about 2,500 people across South Wales predominantly, but we do have some properties in Aberystwyth and in Bangor. And quite a diverse group of services that we deliver. So we deliver care and support, but we also build houses, manage properties, maintain 17,000 homes across South Wales, and we're right across from Chepstow to Milton Haven and everywhere in between. So I guess the perspective I'm coming from is I've actually worked with lots of small organisations in my previous job to help them to do bits of recruitment as a recruitment consultant. But in my current role, some of our services are really big and it would look like a big organisation on their own, but others are really tiny. We might have just 4 or 5 people working in a very small remote location in, I know Sharon, you mentioned Brecon. We've got services in Brecon and further up in Powys and out in Pembrokeshire and places like that where it's a bit more rural. And I guess what we'll talk about today is how there's no one-size-fits-all solution to recruitment and you need to think quite locally. So our approach to how we might recruit in central Newport looks quite different to how we recruit in Dod Wales or somewhere like that. So I'm just about to share my screen. Please give me a nod and a thumbs up when you can see it, so I'm comfortable to carry on.
Yeah, that's good. We can see that. Yeah.
Okay. So we've done our intros. What I was going to go through today is a little bit of a market overview, some of the factors that are out there in the world that are affecting recruitment and are having these impacts on us, and how that affects recruitment. A bit of I don't want to be patronising in this next section, but there will be some stuff which is really simple, but there'll be other things that are the basics that I see missed quite often by companies. So I'll try and cover all the basic stuff that you want to get right. Some of it you'll just be thinking, yeah, that's obvious, but there might be some things in there that are obvious, but you may not be doing. Then some ideas about how to make your recruitment cost effective and think about where you're spending the money and what you're spending it on. And then obviously the questions at the end. There's a fair bit of content, so if you think of a question as I'm talking, please just drop it in the chat and we can pick it up at the end so that you don't forget, I suppose, when we get to the end. I'm happy to answer anything and can come back to you if I don't know the answer later on. Okay, so market overview, what is happening out there? There's all sorts of things going on at the moment that are affecting the workforce and employability. In general, there's an ageing population, you may know that, and there's actually fewer young people. So there's less 18-year-olds now than there were the year before, and the year before that there's a real dip, and a lot of the universities have been struggling to recruit young people into their courses because there's less of them. So there's less people entering the workforce and more people leaving it. So we're at the lowest unemployment rate on record. I saw some news yesterday that Scotland just hit its lowest rate on record again. There's a new record yesterday in Scotland. And there's more people who are, you might have heard this phrase, economically inactive. So those are people who are choosing not to work. So they've either retired or they don't need to work. They have enough to keep themselves going, and they don't want to work. So there's more of those, and there's more, and there's less unemployment. And In the year 21 to 2022, that meant that there was 50,000 less people available for work in Wales. So 50,000 people less than the previous year in the time when we already had the lowest unemployment on record. So these are things that are really making recruitment challenging, particularly into those jobs like front of house roles, where it might be it might be a lower paid job potentially. So there's a lot of competition. There's a challenge around cost of living that we're all very aware of. Wages are rising. So the latest figure I saw was 6.1% this year, but inflation is 11.1%. So it's a real-time loss, loss of earnings. And there's, we've got strike action today. We've got all sorts of things going on that affects people's mentality around looking for work. Obviously, Brexit and negative migration from the EU, but there has been a huge rise in migration from other countries. So there's an opportunity there. So we've got refugees coming here from Ukraine, Syria, Afghanistan, and Wales is set up as a country of sanctuary. That's the term that Wales is using. So there's an opportunity there to hire some really interesting, experienced people. Each sector's got its own challenges due to the pandemic, Brexit, and the recession that we're just about in at the moment. So you'll know about those in your own areas. There's a big sort of debate around working from home at the moment. That's impacting on whether companies are seen as attractive to work for or not. And there's almost a two-tier workforce: the people who can work from home and do their job remotely, and the people who have to be in a place to do their job. You might be in front of house somewhere, you have to be there. Being in a care home looking after somebody, you have to be there. And there starts to become tensions between those jobs, and in some cases people are leaving their in-person jobs to be able to work from home. There's all sorts of emerging technologies where we've got skill shortages, and it's the education system, I suppose, is lagging behind the business world. We've had the Great Resignation. I feel like that's starting to come to an end now, but that's meant that people felt really easy about changing jobs. So retention has been a problem, which means every time you lose somebody, you need to recruit them and train them and all that sort of stuff. And there's a new phrase which I really dislike, but it's around called quiet quitting, where there are people who are staying in their job, but being less productive and doing not necessarily being less productive, but not doing more than their job description. And this creates tensions in teams, and it can create job opportunities that aren't, work that isn't being done, essentially. So all of these things combined are making it a challenging market. This is why it's a challenging market, right? So we've got all these things going on. So what does it mean? So it means that we've got fewer qualified applications. There's lots of vacancies. If you look on Indeed, which is kind of the most prominent job board, it's absolutely chock full of jobs. So any individual organisation trying to get heard above that noise is really difficult. Candidates always have a choice, and if you're the best candidate or the most experienced or the one that comes across best at interview, you probably have multiple options and multiple offers quite quickly. The companies are competing. So being different as an organisation really matters. Knowing who you are and knowing what your value proposition is to a prospective employee is really important, because they have a choice and they need to choose you. And we've been through really tough times recently. So actually caring for people and demonstrating that you care for your employees is really critical. And I hear a lot of people talking about that being one of the main reasons that they either leave a job or that they join somewhere else, is they feel like there's more of a blurring now, I suppose, between the work and the home life, particularly for people who work in their home now. So demonstrating those values, demonstrating compassion and flexibility goes a long way in standing out from the crowd. So getting the basics right. Okay. Sorry if some of this is too basic, but here we go. So first of all, just some principles that I always try and think about when we're recruiting. Really obvious, and this is a principle for life really, but how would you want to be treated? If you're applying for a job, what's the minimum you'd expect? You'd expect to know how you're getting on, whether to hear if you're unsuccessful, to have good communication, to know what you're applying to. So communication is massively important at the moment. I hear about people who've applied for 50 jobs and haven't heard anything. They don't know whether they've got the job, don't know whether they got an interview, don't know anything, and that's terrible. So the least we can do is say to somebody, thank you for your application, but you were unsuccessful in getting shortlisted this time. You have to be really clear about everything involved, and I'll go into this in more detail, but you need to know the salary that you're going to offer, the benefits available, the flexibility available. You need to think about all these things before you advertise, before you go out to talk to people, because the moment you're unsure, you don't get a clear answer. Another company will, and the other company will seem more certain and more interested in them. So you've got to think about that very early on. It's super important to be open-minded and to be thinking broadly about who could potentially do a job. We do a lot of recruitment at the moment that is values-based, so we're looking at people's potential rather than their previous experience in a lot of places, and that helps us recruit a more diverse workforce. And it's better for our teams when we have a more diverse workforce. Actually, we see better retention, we see better productivity, and the managers that I support who are open-minded about the background of people that they hire tend to hire more quickly and more successfully in their experience. Something really important is your timeline, and I've got a diagram of what a typical timeline looks like in the moment. There's so many aspects to that, and we'll go through that in more detail, but you have to have a plan out before you start. And you also need to be thinking about who needs to be involved, and talking to those people in your organisation and getting their time locked in that timeline from the beginning. Because one of the main areas I see where companies miss out on hiring somebody is there's slippage in that timeline because X manager wasn't available for 2 weeks to do an interview or to review a CV, and before you know it, that person's got another job somewhere else, and we've only got one applicant left, and actually we don't fill the job. So getting people involved and brought in early on is super important. So this is what a timeline might look like. You've got your planning phase, which is all the stuff around, do we need to create a job description for this role? How are we going to advertise it? Where are we going to advertise it? How much time do we need? One of the tools I always use, sort of mental tools I use when we're thinking about a timeline, is I speak to the manager and I say, when do you want this person to start? Realistically, when do you think? And at this time of year, they'll normally say January or maybe February if they're thinking further ahead. But then we work backwards from that. So we say, okay, if they're starting 1st of February, they've got a notice period of a month. We need to offer them on the 1st of January and they need to accept it by then. So if they need to be offered by then, we need to take into account there might be a bit of negotiation. That could be a couple of days. Prior to that, we need to do maybe 2 rounds of interviews. Prior to that, we need to advertise and source and shortlist and make some decisions. Prior to that, we need to plan everything and get everything, jobs, benchmarks and whatever we need to do. So before you know it, for a February the 1st start, we probably needed to start in about October. So there's a lot that goes into a perfect timeline for recruitment, and the notice period is often forgotten. But as I was saying, number 1, planning. Number 2, advertising. We're normally looking about 2 weeks. It's traditional. It used to be like a month, like 4 weeks, but you really don't need that time because your early applicants have moved on by that point. You need to move quicker, in my opinion. Shortlisting. So you want to do that right after the close date, or even whilst you're advertising. You can start shortlisting as you go, and letting people know really quickly after that close date, and getting those interviews arranged and getting people into interview quite quickly, usually within a week, and minimise the time between the stages. The offer needs to come right after that last interview, and hopefully by that point we know you've got the right person and you've already been testing them, checking if they, what they want, whether they're going to accept an offer throughout the process. So when you offer them, it shouldn't be a surprise and they should be saying yes. And then you've got that notice period where it's really important to keep in touch, really important to plan their start date and their induction and their kit and getting it all ready to go. Because I see regularly people start, well, I couldn't have a computer for 3 nights, I couldn't have a login, my desk was dirty because the last person who left it in a bad state and nobody's cleaned it up. And those are the things that they arrive in the business and go, oh, actually, I had 2 other offers, I might just go and leave this job and go and take the other offer. So things like that feel small, but they're really important. And then obviously the welcome day, making sure that on their first day they're made really welcome and the people in the business around them are ready for them. Lots to think about that. So really thinking about a realistic time frame and being firm with the key stakeholders, particularly the senior people, because they tend to be the more difficult to tie down to timelines and most pushy. We need to make sure that they understand the process that's needed. We've already mentioned some of these things, but who's going to be on your panel? Who's going to decide the shortlisting criteria and the questions for the interview? And why are we asking those questions? How does it relate to the job and the values we need to find and the skills we need to find? And then are there any other testing tools that we need to use, any psychometric assessments or anything like that that might help us identify the right person or the best person for the job? And then contingency planning. So if it doesn't go wrong, or if it's going to take longer than we think, or if somebody has a 3-month notice period versus a 1-month notice period, how are we going to deal with that? So thinking about maybe agency cover or getting other people to do shifts, overtime for other workers. Can we do a secondment in the meantime? Is there a trigger point where if we realise that our direct recruitment process isn't working, that we then say, right, we've done all that we wanted, that we can at this stage, and we're going to now engage with an agency? That might be important. Or you might want to think from the very beginning, this is such a critical role, we're going to pay an agency to do a great job and get them to do this piece of recruitment for us. So making that decision early on and sticking to it is really important. So cost-effective recruitment, how do we get it right? My thinking on this is a proactive multi-channel campaign is really important. If you just advertise, it's rarely enough. And this is where I see a lot of organisations really struggling, because on Indeed or on a job board, they're visible for hours and they drop down to page 3, 4, or 5, and trying to get in front of Amazon and Tesco and the police and all these big places that spend big money on their advertising and drive traffic to the front page of Indeed, and it's really hard to do. So my thoughts are, let's do it once and do it right. Let's have a tight timeline, make sure we're advertising and sourcing from the right areas. And you have to take that extra responsibility to try and drive as many people to see your job as possible. So if you think of each additional source as an extra chance to find that candidate and get them to apply, the more applications we get, the greater that success rate. I've covered this already, but coordinating the recruitment time is really important. Using that budget wisely over a short impact time frame is really important. I've seen a lot of companies spend a little bit over 4, 5, 6 weeks, maybe even 2, 3 months doing one ad and just keeping it rolling for a long time, hoping somebody will find it. When actually, if they compressed that budget and spent it off a number of different places with over a 2-week period, you'd get a better impact and hopefully a better shortlist. Mentioned before about being open-minded. It's really important not to be too selective when you're shortlisting. Obviously, hit a minimum criteria, but the more people in the process that you meet and speak to, the more likely you'll find the right person. And it's interesting actually how often somebody who on paper seems sort of a medium level candidate, not necessarily the best one, gets the job because there's something there that you just don't know until you meet them. The diamond in the rough, as we like to call it sometimes. And you've got a plan that people will drop out. So if you selected 5 people for interview, 3 might turn up, and then of those 3, 2 might think actually this place isn't for me, and then you've just got 1 left. So actually starting with a bigger pool gives you a better chance of getting to the end. Even though some managers want to be quite selective with their shortlisting, persuading them to be a bit more open-minded and to meet a couple of extra people, in my experience, helps us do it once and do it right. And it gives them a better representation of the market. So if you've met 5 people, when one really stands out, they really do stand out, and you can understand why they are the best person. If you only meet 1 or 2, there's always that question mark of who else is out there, and sometimes people aren't confident enough to make that hiring decision, having only met 2 people. I mentioned this earlier as well, but trial closing candidates. So this is a strange term, but what I mean is you'd say to them that the salary for this role is X and the benefits are Y. If you are successful and we were to offer you that role, would that work for you? Is that the sort of package that you would accept for this position? Not offering them directly, but just really testing the water and seeing how that would work. Talking about things like the flexibility. We need you to be in the office 3 days a week. The office is here. The parking costs X amount. All these sorts of little things, and testing them on all the things that might be a sticking point, so that when you get to the point that we do offer them, you'd fall off the chair if they didn't say yes. That's what we'd like to do. So, of these channels, there's things that you pay for, and there's things that are free. So the things that you pay for, as I'm sure you're well aware, are things like your online advertising, which is the main place that people look for a job, right? So you've got your general job boards like Indeed and Total Jobs and CV Library and Job Site and that kind of thing. So let's jump to the next slide. Read is another one, and they're really good if you spend a decent chunk of money on it and do it over a short period of time. But there's also some really strong specialised job boards where people with very niche skills, like software developer, for example. Hired.com is a really good website. It's really focused on developers and really good audience there. LinkedIn is really good for HR people, for finance people, for tech people as well. Simple Jobs is a range of websites. So they've got an engineering website, they've got a manufacturing website, they've got a nursing website. So they've got very niche sites, but very, very much the audience that you might be looking for. So being selective about which one you go to, depending on the job, is really important to manage your budget, or maybe use both. And there are some direct approach tools as well, which I use all the time. So these are things where you can search CVs and directly message people to say, we have the vacancy, are you interested? And some of the things you can do with that, you can search by a radius around the location of the job. You can search by how active that person is, like when were they last on Indeed, when were they last on LinkedIn or CV Library. And you can search for things like their qualifications, keywords in their CV, all that sort of stuff. And when people are directly approached by a company, it's super powerful. They think, wow, that company's really interested in me. And we get a really, really strong response to those approaches. So they don't cost a huge amount. I think for Indeed CVs, it's about, I think you can get 30 messages for about £100 a month. And it's 30 accepted messages. So people say, yes, I'm happy to receive the message. So all the ones that don't say yes, you don't pay for. So that kind of direct tool is really important. And then of course there's lots of free support. So there's all sorts of employability organisations that can help you and direct candidates to you if they know about your job. The Job Centre, Employ, there's a really strong one in Swansea called Better Jobs and Better Futures. And if you interact with them, they may have candidates for you. Your brand, your social media is really powerful. So, I can share stuff on LinkedIn and get a couple of thousand views, and it costs nothing. It's just it's a free thing. It takes time to build it up, to build an audience up. But if you're thinking over time that your business is growing, it's really important that you create a LinkedIn network and a social media presence wherever you can, because each person's another brick in the wall and that foundation of an audience. Referrals from colleagues is massively important, and you don't have to always pay. There's always this fear that if you ask to pay some sort of bonus to people, actually people are really keen to get good colleagues to come and work with them, and a thank you can often be enough. But yes, some companies pay thousands of pounds for referrals. You don't necessarily need to. But a good person tends to know another good person when they see one, and particularly in local, remote sort of places, it's really important to to use your colleagues' networks. Same, business networks as well. People you meet on calls like this, let them know when you're hiring, and they can refer people they know. We've actually had quite a bit of success with posters and banners. So we've got some properties that are roadside in Newport and Chepstow, and we've just put a big banner outside with a QR code to scan, and it got loads of people scanning it. We have hundreds of people going straight to our website from walking past one of our properties. Word of mouth, reputation, and another option is to offer volunteering or work placements. So that's more of a longer term thing. But if you get a great volunteer or a great student or placement in, I'm sure that you'd reach back out to them when you have an opportunity. So there's a lot of free things that you can do. And the last slide for me is about using an agency. If you use an agency, my opinion on this, having been both sides of the fence, is if you're going to do it, do it. Don't do half measures. Don't do it, but hope that you'll recruit yourself and maybe we won't have to pay the agency. Set a budget, write that money off and go, right, we've decided that we're going to spend that money on the agency, and then get them to do everything and deliver for that money. It's better to go with one agency that can do it than to try and go with multiples and pay the one that gives you the successful candidate, because they don't put as much effort in. If there's 4 other companies that might make that recruitment fee. So if you find the right company that can do it, and it's a company and a person, so the recruitment consultant that you're doing is as important as the brand of the organisation. So you need to find somebody that can tell you, I have a network of people that do that job, and I've filled similar roles for similar organisations. Here's my evidence, here's my references. They should be able to give you a previous client that can have a chat with you. And you need to make sure that you're confident they represent your business in the right way, and give them as much information as you possibly can to help them find that person. If you're paying, I don't know, £5,000, £10,000 in some cases, you want to work with them, not against them. Give them as much info as you can. You're paying basically for a premium service. If you think you could put an ad on Indeed for £100 and maybe fill your job, or you're going to have to spend £8,000 with an agency, you want to get all you can for your £8,000. I skipped a bit, but negotiating, there's always negotiation available with the recruitment company. Can't go too hard, because they're just the very best ones. Just will go to will work with other employers that will pay them more. But you can definitely negotiate on the fact that you're going with them directly. You could potentially pay them a bit upfront, and I'm a big fan of doing this. That when I was a recruiter, whenever somebody paid me upfront, did it dozens and dozens of times, and I filled every single job. I never ever failed to fill a job where somebody paid me upfront. Whenever I've paid agencies upfront a little bit, a proportion of the fee, they're committed then, and they just pull out all the stops to fill the job. It's rare. They rarely ask for that, and companies rarely do it. But I feel like it works really, really well. And people won't charge you up front unless they're confident they can fill the job as well, because it would be such a difficult position to be left in. So a couple of things about agencies. That's more of a permanent recruitment process there that I'm talking about. Obviously, for temporary recruitment, a lot of that remains the same. But again, it's about, with them, the temp is being confident that they're doing all the correct background checking as well. There are some unscrupulous places out there, and you need to make sure that the person coming to work in your business is who you expect them to be, and that they've been, they have the right to work and all that sort of stuff. And all the big names in recruitment would be like those things to think about. There we go. So I'll stop sharing there. Appreciate it. It's probably a whistle-stop tour of a lot of things to do with recruitment, but yeah, hopefully that was of interest. Was there anything that stood out for anybody there as a new idea that they'd like to take away?
We've got no questions in the chat, but if anyone's got anything specific that they want to pick up from what Richard says, this is a sort of fairly informal, open discussion now. So if anyone's got any thoughts.
For me, it was very interesting what you said about, is it we're a haven of refugees, I think you mentioned,
Yeah.
coming in. And it's quite interesting that we don't actually tap into that source at all, do we?
There's I went to a meeting a month or so ago where Mark Drakeford was actually there, and he did a speech about Wales as a sanctuary, a place of sanctuary. So he spoke about some Ukrainian refugees in Ceredigion who have been employed by Haldar Health Board as carers. So they, I don't know the full story, but they've been given support by the local health board to do their sort of basic training, to go in and work in the NHS there, and it had been a really big success. There's a whole lot of agencies involved with refugees. There's not many of them, but a refugee has, once they have refugee status, they have unlimited rights to work in the UK and to remain in the UK. So one of the challenges is being a company that's open to refugees applying, and actually their support workers have said to me that sometimes there's a barrier really where some of our job descriptions and some of the way that job ads are written, people think that because they don't have the experience in the UK, they might not be able to apply. So if you talk more openly in the job advert about being values led and the kind of experiences you're looking for, then you may get those applications. IKEA was the other example that on the day where they take on, I think every quarter they do a hiring session for people who are refugees to the country, and in Cardiff this is, and they take on people every time. They took 6 people on in the last quarter, and they said the retention of those people is 95%. So 95% people who take on stay with them. And I mentioned 2 people who are now team managers in IKEA in Cardiff who their first job in the UK was there as a refugee. So they're really powerful thing that you can do if you can get people to see our jobs and get them to come along and work for us. Obviously, there can be a challenge with language, so there's lots of support available to the individuals. And some jobs you could do without being able to speak English, I guess, but others might be a bit more difficult.
Thank you, Richard. That was great.
We've got a question in the chat, Richard, from Catherine at Plantasia. Says searching for CVs on Indeed, etc., is a route not previously tried. Is this more suitable for recruiting management positions rather than those in front of house roles?
Not necessarily. So I'd say the LinkedIn recruitment feature is, so if you were on LinkedIn Recruiter, you wouldn't really find too many people that would be suitable for front of house as much. But on Indeed, it's basically everybody who's looking for jobs. So what it is more difficult to do is to narrow down to somebody who has transferable skills. So unless they've got the phrase, I don't know, maybe receptionist or front of house or something like that in their CV, you might not find them. So you might want to think about what other customer service sort of experiences might somebody have, what other phrases might they write on their CV that might be applicable. And then if you narrow it down to the location, then you might find some people there that you can approach who maybe haven't done a front of house role before, but they might have worked as like a customer service representative or something like that, and it's a very similar in-person skill set. And what the powerful thing with the Indeed search is you can see who was most recently online, and sometimes it's literally the same day. So the idea being that they should be interested in hearing from you. That makes sense.
I guess the platform that you choose in some respects is kind of defines itself in terms of candidates that you might expect. So TikTok, for example, I saw that you mentioned TikTok on your presentation. It's probably going to give you different results to seeking on LinkedIn, for example. So maybe it's a little bit about thinking around the role you're looking to recruit and where you might find suitable candidates for that.
I admit I still don't have TikTok, so it's something that's on our agenda for next year. But I know a lot of marketing and creative jobs where they're looking at graduates and things like that. That's where they put their jobs. They put them on TikTok because that's where the creative people are. So yes, you are. It's all sorts of places. But like I said earlier, if you can do multi-channel, something like TikTok is free. You may only have, I don't know, 20 or 30 followers, but it doesn't cost you anything to do that. So the point I think is as many of those things as you can do, the more likely it is you'll get that extra engagement.
Okay, so another question from Catherine at Plantasia. Another site I work for, which is very remote, South Brecon Beacons, which seems to restrict applications. Any tips on this, please?
We've got locations in Leith, Brecon, yeah, there's all sorts of places like that. It is difficult. You've got to make clear things like the benefits and what's in that location. So if you've got parking, if you've got close public transport, if there is a bus stop nearby or something like that, that's quite important. And then reach out to the nearest bigger locations. So, for example, I'm in Abergavenny now. That's where I live. We have some services here which we find it really hard to recruit for. So we do some advertising in Evervale and Bryn Mawr, which is just 10 minutes up the road. And a lot of people will come from that direction to Abergavenny for work, and that's been quite successful. What we've also done is, I don't know, I'm not sure what your Facebook following is like at Fantasia, but the Pobl group Facebook, we do a post on that, and then you can pay to boost that post. So it's going to link to the job. It costs very little, so it might be like £30 to do, and you can set an audience for that. So you can put an audience within, you could say, 20 miles of that location, and anybody on Facebook in that location will see that. So it's not a job posting as such. It's a general post about your organisation saying you're recruiting, and anybody in the area, because it's about employment, see it. So it's a bit more of a scattergun approach. It's not, you're not looking at people who are specifically recruiting, but by paying, it will plonk it in people's feed on their Facebook and their Instagram and their Messenger. So that's been really powerful for us, and we use that in Paris, a place called Knighton, really well. And we found some local people that weren't really looking for a new job, but they happened to see the Facebook post, and that worked. So, but again, that kind of depends a bit on your initial audience, but you can pay to do that, and it's much more cost effective than you think. I never pay more than £30 at a time for those jobs. So compared to thousands of pounds on a recruitment agency, it's worth it there.
Am I right in thinking that on Facebook you've got to be a little bit careful around, or there's limitations around recruiting, specifically targeting ages, demographics, that sort of thing?
Yeah, so on the Facebook targeting, you have to say that it's about employment, and then because you've selected employment, it doesn't let you narrow it by age or anything like that. It's literally by location and interests. You can put interests in, so you could put, also you could put job hunting as an interest, but you can't put age, gender, anything else like that. But if you were advertising, I don't know, rugby boots or something, you could say age males between 12 and 18 or something like that. But you can't do that for jobs. Like, it has to be open, like just open. But it works well if you narrow it to a location. So yeah, that works quite well. And sharing, I mean, being Zoom, I'd be sharing images, sharing videos, sharing all the great content that you must have. I mean, I'd be quite excited about seeing the job there if I was in that local area. But also in local areas, another thing. Sorry, I keep thinking of new ideas, but we've done quite a lot of local flyering as well. So getting a good branded poster with a link and QR code on it, and putting it in local community centres, shops, supermarkets often have notice boards. It's quite old school, but it kind of works as well. Just being present in the location, but also online. Those are probably the two main ways, but there's no perfect answer because of the limited population in those areas.
Just linked to Catherine's point, and this probably doesn't apply to Catherine quite so much because it is a face-to-face, public-facing role, particularly for chancellor handlers, or whatever it might be. But we were talking about it slightly before, but the sort of the how geography maybe has become less of a requirement with remote working. Sort of maybe particularly applies to jobs in sort of remote rural locations. And I guess there were movements towards this before COVID, but if anything, that's accelerated significantly. Sort of maybe a trend that was happening. So sort of where do you see this in terms of applicants' expectations versus where employers are at, and sort of that balance between remote working? In theory, you can take a job anywhere in the world now and work remotely. So where are we with that, do you think?
There's probably three layers to it. So there's the organisations who are completely remote. They don't expect you to get together, don't expect you to be in the office. You can work from anywhere, and that's the culture. That's quite limited. There's not many companies like that. There are a few, but not many. Most will expect you to be in person at some point, somewhere. Then where I see the majority of organisations now is this kind of hybrid of working in the office and working remotely, with a maybe 60 to 70% remote, the rest in the office. What is really important is the purpose for that. Why are you going to the office? Who else will be there? What sort of work will you do on those days? And sometimes it is purely for culture, for getting to know each other better and getting along better as a team. Other times it's to do collaborative work. And then there's the third case of organisations like Catherine's, where you have to be there to do the job. There's no computer from home. And it starts to create tensions, and there are people in that in-person workforce that are looking for a remote job. They want to work from home. They want to work behind the computer. There are people who are forced to work from home or have to work from home, but actually their home life isn't very comfortable, and they prefer to be in the office with all their colleagues like before, but they can't. And if they do go to the office, they're on their own. Not everyone else is working from home, and that can be something from a well-being perspective that's really challenging. But I think it offers a lot of opportunity for companies to access a wider pool of people. So when I'm recruiting for my team, previously I'd need somebody who could get into Newport or to Swansea every day. Now I've got one of my team lives in Birmingham, and she comes down once a month. I've got people that live in the Gower, and myself in Abergavenny, and Cardiff, and all over South Wales. And we've got to choose from a much wider pool of people, and you end up with potentially a better mix, I suppose. One of the things that's really challenging for Wales is, particularly in the tech sector and engineering and jobs where you can do them remotely, is people being able to get what were traditionally sort of London-weighted salaries, staying in Cardiff or staying in Swansea or wherever. So they can pick up a job with a company in London, whereas before they'd have to go to London to get that job and get paid a much higher salary. So that pulls that you used to be able to look along the M4 and you'd get a bigger salary the closer you get to London. But now that barrier is gone, and it means that local employers have to, in some cases, if they want to retain the absolute top talent, they're having to pay a higher salary. But I think that will even out over time, because that London weighting just doesn't necessarily apply to a remote job, and I think companies will start to recognise that. And I think some of the London-based companies might start paying slightly less to people who don't come into London. If that makes sense. But we're in this weird transition phase where you hear of people working here and getting 20-30% more than what they would if they get that same job in Wales. So that can be quite challenging. But I'm excited by it. I think it gives people more options in their life. better work-life balance more often than not, and the companies will embrace it and engage with that and to be able to hire more easily and more quickly.
Yeah, Sharon, there's a note from Sharon in the chat. Recruitment in Brecon is helped by Facebook. Certainly, we've also tapped into local platforms such as Brecon FYI, where job adverts. So Sharon, what's that? Is that like a local sort of online community, or?
Yes, it is. Certainly Facebook seems to be very successful for us in that part of the woods, and we don't tend to struggle once we use those mediums. It's a really good way of local people keeping in touch, it seems. It's Swansea that we do struggle with. So for me, as Catherine touched on, dipping into the CVs through Indeed and doing a search, I'm going to certainly give that a try, but also encourage my recruiting managers not to be so selective as you touched on, and look for those diamonds in the rough, not put all our eggs in one basket, certainly. We're going to give that a try.
Mindset with that is not to assume that because the best CV, the best candidate isn't just meeting you, then meeting 2 or 3 other people probably. And you can see the other job ads that are out there. It's rare that you'll have a vacancy and there isn't another vacancy like it. So going to assume the worst, really assume that you've got to really woo them and do all you can to get them over the line. Although I do think we're heading into a little bit of a improvement in terms of quality of candidates, and I think there's going to be a bit more retention, and because of the recession, I think people will be less likely to want to change jobs and be more nervous about changing jobs, which tends to lead to having less job vacancies out there, which means when a good job does come up, it's rarer, so you get more you might get better applications at that time because there haven't been so many jobs, if that makes sense. So I think in 6 months' time, you might have less of a challenge in terms of the quality of applicants, but maybe less vacancies to go along with it. That's something that tends to be the cycle. Steve, so your hand's been up. You're on mute.
You're on mute, Steve.
I always found when I was sort of recruiting, was looking at maybe if it was like if I was looking at someone in the locality, a lot of the time I'd use sort of free like social media groups like Facebook and maybe and maybe some LinkedIn, which were like actually formed within that locality, because that's pretty good free advertising. And also looking at different skill sets and some of the groups you can kind of target. Like, for example, when I was working in construction, we were doing work overseas, and these security guys who were used to working overseas. So what we did was just pinpoint where we could find some sort of retired army guys. They had their own sort of groups, and also link up with like the army resettlement teams as well, which are very helpful. So it's about thinking outside the box, looking at what your skill set is, and think about, potentially where these guys have got those transferable skills, going out and trying to sort of find them, being a bit more proactive. I always found that really useful. But the other thing I want to ask you, which is always a challenge, was what you mentioned, Richard, was like the young people, and internships are obviously a really good way, but I think a lot of it these days, I think, is sort of the perception around the type of work that maybe you're offering. People have a lot of preconceived ideas, don't they, with anything, if they haven't actually done it, or maybe know anyone who's actually done it. So obviously internship is a good way of doing that. But how important is it to have like quite a good either internship, apprenticeship program, work experience, stuff like that, where you can get young people to actually come in and experience a day doing that type of work, and just to change perceptions, which they can then share with friends and on social media and all that type of stuff. Utilize their social media to help you, maybe.
It's really important. It's hard. It's quite intensive to organise as an organisation. So you need to have kind of a longer term approach to it. Because often we think about, we have a vacancy that we want to fill now, Well, you need to think about is how many vacancies will we need to fill next year with young people. So if it's worthwhile, then you should always have a work placement every year from your local high school or college. You should always have an apprenticeship starting or a graduate scheme starting, or every 2 years, or whatever's right for your organisation. But very few can like that, and that's usually because the recruitment right here, right now, takes the precedent, and it's really urgently important. But I think you're right, so right. It's one of the ways you can kind of do it, and we've done it a little bit, and I want to do more of it really, is just through the use of video, so really showing people this is what this workplace looks like, and this is what somebody doing the job looks like. This is how it works. So in my sector, a lot of the recruitment is in supporting people with homelessness or with housing issues, or with parents, and working with older people or people with disabilities. And there's a lot of preconceptions about what that's like and how that you're some person who does that job. And actually, when you go to some of these places, it's a much more vibrant and exciting and fun work environment. And the only way to show that without taking somebody there is to video it and to get people to see that video. So whenever we post videos about stuff, we get comments from the recruitment, the applicants to say, I applied because I saw that video, that manager, I'd love to work for them, or it looked like a lovely place. And just think, wow, none of that would have got across in the job description of the job. Again, it's taking that extra step, that extra time to think about how it's a marketing job in some ways, being a recruiter. It is, it's a sales job. You're selling the dream of coming to work for this organisation. And you've got to really think about it. It's hard, but it can be really difficult with young people because of the noise of every other organisation out there.
Have we got? It's 3 minutes to. Just any last questions before we sort of start to wrap things up? I'll take that as no. Just one sort of final thought for me, probably sort of a fairly concise answer. The words competitive salary, is that ever okay? No.
What is the salary? Just say the salary.
Here we are.
You've normally got a budget in mind, right? So you know what the max is. You might not want to pay to the max, so you might just. It's really difficult, but like I said right at the beginning, you have to be clear about these things, because people will look at it and go, "Well, is my current salary competitive? I don't know." So what does competitive mean? And if you say it, you need to be available to have a conversation with a phone number on there to say, if you want to talk about this job, call me, so that people can actually find out. Because otherwise they just won't apply. Look at it somewhere else where it's easier to. Sorry, that wasn't very concise.
Yeah, I thought that would be your answer.
Yeah.
Good. So yeah, there's various messages in the chat, including Sharon says one of our family centres is a Pobl owned building that we use rent free. Fantastic to have such a supportive partner. So it's been a really useful session. We've covered a lot of ground, but it's been really, really helpful. And I'm sure that people watching this on YouTube subsequently will find it helpful. You'll see if you work your way back up the chat, there's a couple of things that I've put in there. Firstly is a link to all of our previous sessions on our YouTube channel, which includes every Power Hour that we've done, and also the Startup Enterprise Club. There's also a couple of videos, one more still to come, on sessions that were never made live to an audience, so sort of behind closed doors. So just because you've been to every session, don't think that you've seen everything. So go back and have a look at our YouTube channel, because it's a useful resource. There's about 25 videos on there or so now. And also, if you're not already, I guess you probably all are. But for the purpose of people watching back on our YouTube, do sign up to our e-newsletter, because that's the way that you'll find out about all of these events in future, and indeed any sort of business news and information coming down the line. For example, we'll be launching a new round of funding programs, grant funding programs, sort of probably towards end of January, certainly in the new year. Anything further from you, Steve, in terms of announcements?
No, nothing else. Just everyone have a good Christmas and happy New Year.
Yeah, same here.
Absolutely.
Okay, guys.
Thank you very much.
Good stuff.
Great.
So we'll be
Thank you,
guys.
we'll be launching a full programme of these sessions in the new year. But as I say, Steve says, have a good break and look forward to seeing you in 2023.